When I was a teenager, I loved Chuck Palahniuk. It started with Invisible Monsters, read that book, loved it. Then it progressed to Fight Club. I had already seen the movie and I loved the movie and I loved the book and I thought that they were both great in their own way. And then it just kept going. Then it was Choke, Survivor, Lullaby, Diary, everything that he had written. I was just eating all of that up. And after a while, once you kind of read an author many times, you kind of get used to it and it doesn't hit the same way. And now as an adult, I've gone back and I reread Fight Club last year, and now I just reread Choke. And with a fully developed brain and with the knowledge of what I know about all of his books, it feels different now. But before I get into that, let me start from the beginning. Choke came out in 2001 and it's the story of Victor Mancini, who is a medical school dropout and a sex addict. His mom has Alzheimer's disease and she's staying at a very expensive hospital, St. Anthony's. And Victor tries to fund this very expensive hospital by going to restaurants and choking on the food. So he goes in, he finishes half his meal, and then he starts to choke, which then leads people to rescue him. So they give him the Heimlich maneuver, and then because they feel very connected to him, they just saved a life, they keep following up with him and giving him money. And there's a dual purpose to his choking. One is, it's a con. He's just trying to con people out of money. And according to him, people just keep sending him checks and birthday cards and checking in on him. And he keeps making up bills and different reasons for why he needs the money, which then lets people to keep paying him. And he just keeps running this night after night in restaurants. And the other reason is because he needs to feel close. So it's a way of trying to get human connection. In addition, Victor works at a reenactment museum. So it's a reconstructed colonial town, and he works with his friend Denny, who he met at a Sex Addicts Anonymous meeting. So they're both recovering. And according to him, everyone at this colonial reenactment place is basically a recovering addict from one thing or another. This book jumps back and forth from the present to the past. The flashback scenes are of his childhood with his mother, who was very, very unstable. She was unwell and he was put into foster homes. And every time he was put into a foster home, his mom would kidnap him, take him away, and then would then wreak havoc on different places. So she would always be arrested. She would do things like free animals from zoos, change shampoo bottles and color dye bottles, just creating trouble for society and the world. And she would keep feeding him these conspiracy theories and different ideas that are just completely made up. So he had a very unstable childhood. She would always endanger him, and that's how he basically grew up. In the present, his mom has basically stopped eating, and again, she's very sick. She has Alzheimer's, and most of the time she doesn't recognize him. So every time he comes in, she thinks that he's somebody else. Usually it's Fred Hastings, which is one of her attorneys, and he just keeps making up stories about Fred Hastings, that he's married, he has a kid and wife and his job. And so most of the time, he doesn't even talk to his mother as himself. And while he's in the hospital, he also kind of makes the other old people feel better because other people also may have dementia or Alzheimer's. They accuse him of being all these different people. They accuse him of doing all these different things. And instead of fighting them on it, he accepts it. So he says, yes, I'm the one who scratched your car. I'm the one who killed your dog. Anytime someone kind of comes to him with a grievance, he takes that in and says, yes, I am the one and I am sorry. So he kind of makes the person feel like they moved on by taking on all these different things that they're trying to deal with in their old age. He also falls for Dr. Paige Marshall, who is a doctor who is taking care of his mother. One day, Dr. Marshall tells Victor that she has a cure for his mom, that if she gets pregnant, she can then take the stem cells from the fetus and inject it into his mother's brain. So she asks him to sleep with her. And again, Victor is a sex addict, but he has feelings for Paige, for Dr. Marshall, and so he doesn't want to do it. Later, Victor finds out that his mom really wants to tell him something, but every single time she doesn't know who she's talking to. And so she says, I want to talk to my son, Victor. So then Victor gets his friend Denny to pretend to be him and asks Denny to talk to his mom. His mom tells Denny that my secret is in my diary. He finds the diary. The diary is all in Italian, and Dr. Marshall happens to know Italian, and so she translates it for him. And in the diary, she finds out that apparently his mother got pregnant with the foreskin of Jesus Christ. So that his mom stole the foreskin of Jesus Christ, and that's how she became impregnated. Dr. Marshall does more research, and then she calls him, telling him that, this is absurd. We know that your mom was unwell, but I called all these fertility places and all these different centers, and it seems like this is kind of checking out, that it seems like there's some truth to this point. So then we see that Victor becomes very conflicted because on the one hand, he sees himself as a degenerate, as a bottom feeder of society. He feels like he's no good. He dropped out of medical school. He's working at a dead-end job, and he doesn't think that he's good for people. And all of a sudden, he gets to feel like maybe he's destined for something, or that maybe it's right. So he's in a state of disbelief, but also partially feeling like maybe this is true. And so then he starts to try to be a better person, and he thinks, well, maybe I should be good. So he has this internal conflict between wanting to stay where he is and to be a failure and to be an addict and to not improve, but on the other hand, thinking that perhaps there's a different side to him and that perhaps he could be a good person. And as we have seen, he does take on the sins of others. He does make other people feel better. So he thinks maybe there's some truth to that. His friend Denny is then fired from the museum. He moves in with Victor, and then he starts collecting rocks. Every day that he is sober from his sex addiction, he brings home one rock, although soon it becomes more than one rock. Sometimes it's 10 rocks, and it just keeps going and going. Eventually, Denny collects so many rocks that it pretty much clutters the entire house. There are rocks everywhere in every nook and cranny. It's just completely jammed. And Victor goes to the hospital, and he decides that he's going to talk to his mom and tell her that he knows the truth. He knows that he's the second coming. So in the hospital, he says, Mom, I know where I come from. You don't have to pretend with me. I know the truth. And I know that I'm the son of Jesus Christ. And his mom looks confused, and she says, I don't know what you're talking about. I stole you when you were a baby. I came from Italy, and I needed an anchor baby. I wanted citizenship, so that's why I took you from somebody else, and you're not my son. And he is in a state of denial, so he doesn't want to believe her, and he keeps feeding her the pudding until she chokes on it and dies. Dr. Paige Marshall comes into the room, and when she's in the room and she's looking after Ida, the mom, her bracelet falls, and it shows that she has also been a patient at this hospital the entire time. The plot is indeed very interesting, and I still had fun reading it the second time around, but it does feel very different now. And I listened to an interview by Chuck Palahniuk, and he said that he wrote Choke after Fight Club, and it was during a period of time when Fight Club was gaining popularity. The film came out, and he was getting all these calls and requests for interviews. And during this time, he gets a call saying, hey, we believe we may have found your father's body. Can you come identify the body? And so he had to drive down to identify his father's body. He was sadly murdered. And Palahniuk was in a very weird headspace. Naturally, he was on the one hand experiencing all this positivity and fame, but also at the same time something horrible and very tragic. And he says that he got the idea for Choke when he was driving after identifying his father's body, and he just wanted to stop his car, open his door, get out, put the headlights on, and lie on the road, on the asphalt, with the headlights on his body, and just wait for the police to come. And he said that he just wanted to lie there and just wait for the moment where an officer would come up to him and ask him what's wrong, and to care about him, and to be concerned, and to worry about his well-being. And so Chuck Palahniuk did that. No officer came, but that's where the idea came to him. So this idea of ways of fooling people to meet your emotional needs. And this is what Victor Mancini does in the novel through choking. It's a con, but at the root of it, it's also a way to get some human connection, a way to get somebody else to care about you, to feel like you're needed and wanted. And we see the same thing in Fight Club. And I did think that this book and Fight Club have quite a few similarities. So if you're trying to read them back to back, it feels kind of like an extension of the same book. One of the themes is, of course, this need for connection. So in Fight Club, the unnamed narrator goes to meetings for people who are in recovery for cancer or cancer groups because he just wants to feel seen, and loved. He goes because he needs to have that hug. He wants to feel like he wants to cry it out, this moment of catharsis, this way of feeling connected to other people, even though he's lying and pretending to be sick, even though he's not. So we see the same thing with Victor, where he's choking on food because he wants to feel that hug. He wants to feel connected and supported. He wants his emotional needs met. And we also see the parallel of going to meetings. Victor goes to meetings for sex addiction, and the unnamed narrator in Fight Club goes to meeting to meet his emotional needs. Victor's mother, Ida Mancini, also seems to be an iteration of Tyler Durden, and she seems to have pretty much the same philosophy as Tyler Durden. So Tyler and Ida both have this knack for pranking and for creating chaos and for destruction. So they both pull these kinds of pranks on society, which generally are somewhat harmless, but are damaging overall. They're just creating chaos overall for society. And both Tyler and Ida have this very self-destructive philosophy on life, and they're both very anti-conformity and anti-society. And in both cases, Victor and the unnamed narrator play kind of the straight man, the person who's sort of in opposition, who feels kind of neutral, who's not good, but who doesn't hold that same self-destructive philosophy. We also have the classic twist ending in both books. So in Fight Club, we know what the ending is, and in this particular case, the twist is the fact that Dr. Marshall is not really a doctor, so the major twist often comes at the end. And I feel like in these two books, Palahniuk also has this element of self-mutilation, or I guess something that's grotesque when it comes to the main character. In Fight Club, it was the fact that the unnamed narrator had a gunshot wound through his cheek and he had a hole in his cheek. And with Victor Mancini, there's a scene where he gets beads stuck in his butt and then he can't, I guess, defecate. And it happens at the very end. So there's physical discomfort and there's grossness. And there is kind of an underlying element of grossness in all of his books. It doesn't feel that strong to me, and I feel like some of it feels just for the shock value, which leads me to my next point. When you read enough of Chuck Palahniuk's books, it feels like you kind of start to pick up what he's putting down, and the themes in all of his books appear to be the same or very similar. It's chaos, entropy, devolution, the sameness of society, and the desire to break free from that sameness through self-destruction or destruction. And in essence, it's this message of society sheep and conformity equals death. And it feels like the characters, the main characters, don't truly change, but rather they kind of learn more about themselves by the end of the book, but there's no reflection on how to be better, how to be different. And if there is, it's always at the very, very end. And so it's unclear whether or not they will change ultimately going forward. So sometimes it feels like it's the same character jumping from book to book, but with a different name. And it's still a lot of fun. It's very enjoyable, and the characters are fun. But it has an underlying feeling of sameness in his stories, which is kind of ironic because he fights against sameness. And also, I think in his books, there is this underlying message of everything is just a copy of a copy of a copy. And we see this kind of theme playing out in all of his books when you read them back to back. And of course, there's always an ongoing theme of destruction, taking things apart, but not knowing how to put them back together. The other big element in his books is the gross writing. So he tries to add a lot of different things into his book that is intended to gross people out. And the point is for shock value. And at first, it feels like he's trying to convey a certain message or trying to connote sort of a certain vibe with some of the scenes that he writes. But I think after a while, after you read enough of his stuff, it feels like it's not to give more insight into the character, but really to shock the audience, which to me kind of feels a little bit like a missed opportunity. His books are relatively short, and it feels like the scenes don't add enough of character development, and I feel like they are done mostly to gross people out. And then there are the characters. So most often I feel like he focuses on kind of the bottom tier of society, so to speak, the deadbeats in society, and it feels like there's almost a reverence for these people in society, that these people are romanticized, that yes, they're not portrayed in the best light, But at the same time, they're described as almost free. They're different from the normies. The normal people are judged sort of in his books, and the people who are addicts, who are degenerates, are seen in a different light, that at least they know where they're coming from, that at least they know how their life is going to end. And all the characters that we get to know tend to be like this. All the characters have their own quirks. They're all unique in their own way. But again, after a while, it feels like, well, if everybody's special, then nobody's special. It's a very Palahniuk-esque kind of writing when it comes to characters. He also has a very distinct writing style. One thing that you see throughout his books is the repetition of phrases. So in this book, there were a few. One is, what would Jesus not do? The other one is listing all the possible medical ailments when someone describes something being wrong, or when someone is saying something that could potentially relate to an illness. He then says, see also melanoma, see also this and that. And this is repeated multiple times throughout the book. There's also this term where he says, doormat is not the right word, but it's the first word that comes to mind. And that line is also repeated, not specifically that word, but multiple times throughout the book. And it is fun in terms of writing style. It is unique, but after a while, it kind of starts to weigh on you, or you start to, I guess, if you read enough of his books. I feel like at first I absolutely loved it, and it feels poetic almost, that you're not reading just a book, but kind of an absurdist poem that have these lines of repetition. But as an adult, it just felt very redundant, and after a while, it felt like it was too much. Like it was overdone. It almost felt like he was trying to hit a certain word count. And when I was younger, I just would write down my favorite quotes from all these different books and articles, and I feel like I would quote him a lot. And he has a lot of lines that are fantastic, that hit really well and that feel very true. Not saying that they're not true. He has lines that feel deep. But when you look at his book and the story, sometimes it feels more like a collection of quotes rather than a full-fledged story sometimes. I know I'm coming off as super, super critical. I mean, I do enjoy his books. I did love them when I was younger, and I just think that reading it over again, I pick up on things that I didn't pick up on before. There is also a theme in this book that I picked up on that I think is interesting and kind of unique to this book, and that's the idea of purpose, which is reflected in Denny's story. So Denny is Victor's best friend, and he does start out very much like Victor. He works at the reenactment museum, and he's usually in the stocks because he's always doing something wrong. And he's also a sex addict, and he struggles a lot with it, and he's overweight, and he's just kind of not in the best place. And so when he moves in with Victor, he starts collecting these rocks, and it seems like he becomes a hoarder, where it's just more rocks and more rocks and more rocks, where it becomes very cluttered. But slowly we see that he's improving. So he becomes a lot more fit. All of a sudden he's ripped. He's got a ton of muscles. His hair is starting to grow back. He's a lot healthier. He gets into a relationship. And it does seem like he is moving towards something. He has found a new purpose. He has found new meaning. And when I was talking to my book club about this book, one of my friends mentioned that this is kind of the story of Sisyphus, almost in a way that, the myth of Sisyphus is Sisyphus was condemned by the gods to push a boulder up a hill. And then once the boulder gets all the way up there, it starts to roll back down, and Sisyphus must come back down to get it. And so that is his fate for eternity. That is his punishment. And sort of Denny is reflecting that he's working towards something. And it seems like this story is almost reflective of this idea that Albert Camus presents about the myth of Sisyphus in his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, about finding purpose in an absurd universe. That Sisyphus is actually doing what is best, that he has found meaning, and that yes, all you do is push a boulder up a hill, and then it rolls back down, and then you do it again. But a purpose is a purpose, and in an absurd universe, you must find purpose to exist. And so even though Denny's not really working towards anything, he has found his purpose, and it's making him better. And I like this interpretation. At the same time, I think I've become such a cynic that because I've read enough of Palahniuk's books, it just, I guess, if we're overly cynical, it doesn't feel like that's the direction he was going in, or that it's not really the message he was trying to send. But maybe I've just become too jaded and I've read too many books at the same time, and perhaps I'm just in a different place where I view things in a different lens. But I do think that this book is a ton of fun to read. And I also think that perhaps some of the experience was ruined by the fact that I remembered some things and I remembered the ending. As soon as I started reading, it came to me. So I think it does take away from the experience when you still remember things from the book. But his books are so easy to read. I feel like they're great on like a flight or a trip. You take them, you consume them at once. And the poetic writing, the short writing just makes it easy to go through. And yeah, so if anyone wants me to talk about Fight Club or any one of his other books, let me know. I'll see you next time.